Everyone, hello guys, come in, join us. Today I have a big honor to introduce you to a good friend of mine, live from Australia, Dominic Longcraft. I'm sending him an invite and let's connect you in. Oh,
Is that better?
much better. Yes.
Okay, good.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dominic Longcraft.
Hello, everybody.
Nice to see you. Please join us. Hi, guys. Hi. Come in. Let's start. Dominic.
Yes.
You're one of the most multicultural people that I know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure. I know that you've been traveling. You've been traveling everywhere and doing real estate for quite some time now. Where you were born?
I was born in London, England.
Okay.
And I've been in real estate now for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know that you did Switzerland first, right?
That's right. I was an owner broker in Gstaad in Switzerland, a ski resort, for 14 years, and then in New York City for almost 7 years, and then for 6 years, and then I arrived in Australia last year and became a broker at Christie's in February of this year.
That's right. Just to add that wherever you go, you're a very successful broker. You're always on top of your game.
That's very kind. That's very kind.
We know that. Talk to me about Australia. For most of the people, Australia, it's something very exotic, something like so far away that we would almost think that people probably walking like upside down there. There should be something like completely different. How different it is.
Yeah, it is. It is a very different market. However, in the last 10 years, the market has matured massively. And one of the reasons is for that is that obviously Australia is a country of many natural resources, and one of their biggest natural resources in the mining industry. And they for the last 15, or probably more years than that, but at least in the last 15 years, there has been a huge trade with China. And the country has done very well financially. Obviously, now it's a different situation because of the bushfires we had earlier in the year, and now with the COVID-19 pandemic, like the rest of the world, it's unfortunately the country's gone into recession. But
were you severely affected by COVID?
No, not really, because the Australian government very smartly closed all the borders to China and to some other countries on the 6th of February. So basically, the virus didn't really have a chance to mutate in the way that it has in other countries. I think there were something like 6,500 cases, but I think the deaths have only been 103 or something like that. And now, essentially, there are a few new cases every day, but it's certainly not on the scale of the UK and the US. So,
were you closed down as well?
Yes, we were in lockdown as well, but not in the kind of lockdown which was experienced in some other countries. Australia at the moment still has basically closed borders. So if you do come back into Australia, so mainly Australians, there is a 2-week quarantine in a hotel. So you're not allowed to quarantine at home. You have to quarantine in designated hotels in your hotel room for 2 weeks. So it's a bit of a deterrent, obviously, for clients coming in our business in real estate. It's been tough because some of the high net worth individuals that would come and buy the properties which I'm selling are not there at the moment. We're seeing them, we Zoom with them, we FaceTime with them, we communicate by email, by telephone, but actually coming physically into the country that's an issue for them at the moment. So we're hoping that the borders will start to open up within the next few months, and then it will kickstart the market. But the market in Sydney is interesting because, as I was saying, that in the last 10 years there's been a big explosion.
Sorry to interrupt. Before we go to the market, can you
Yeah.
tell a little bit, like just little overview how is Sydney organized? What is the structure? Is there like residential areas, commercial areas?
Yes. So if you imagine New York City and you imagine the downtown area, okay, the downtown area is a similar size of what they call here in Sydney the CBD, which is the Central Business District. So it's kind of a peninsula in Sydney where there is a number of the offices, and there is a number of the businesses and the high rises which are centralized in one area around an area called Circular Quay. And Circular Quay historically is a port essentially. So the cruise ships come in, all the ferry transport which connects the city together. There's like a hub. So around that, in the back of that, is this area called the CBD. And I would say it's kind of sort of, yeah, it's about the same size as downtown. It's certainly not the same size as Manhattan, but it's probably, maybe a third size of Manhattan. And then you start to have a lot of suburbs. There are huge amounts of suburbs in Sydney. Obviously, there is a lot of waterfront. So there is many properties which are located with water views and which are actually on the water. So they sort of circular around the city, going out maybe, I mean, we're talking kilometers here, I suppose, as much as maybe 5 or 6 kilometers going outside the city. And then you start to become more rural, and there are sort of very big homes which are situated on the outside of the city, which have acreage. So the kind of the most luxurious area, so let's say the Upper East Side or the downtown area, or in London it would be Knightsbridge, Belgravia, is the area of the eastern suburbs. So those are the suburbs which are connected to the east of the city. And there are areas which are called Vaucluse, Point Piper, Double Bay, and those areas have got some very luxurious properties. And in fact, me being at Christie's, our office is in Double Bay, which is in the heart of that kind of the eastern suburbs. And we then obviously transact with many of the luxury properties in that area. Yeah. So that's how it is. The Sydney itself is, I think, a population of 3 million people. The whole of Australia is 25 million people. But the land mass is the same size almost as the United States.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking about 1/10 of the people, 1/10 of the people living on the same land mass, because essentially it's the coasts which have the where people live. In the middle of Australia, there really are no towns, no villages. There's nothing. It's basically, yeah, it's what they call the bush, which essentially is the outback, where it's, you can drive from Sydney to Perth, which would be approximately the same as going from New York to Los Angeles. But in the United States, you'd be going through towns and villages the whole way through, whereas in Australia, you would probably stop seeing houses after about 3 to 4 hours, and then you would have 2 days of a straight road going across.
Oh, wow. Did you ever do this kind of road?
No, I've never done that. I had friends of mine in the 1980s after college who did that. I myself never did that. I came to Australia for the first time ever in 2003. After I met my wife, and I've been coming back regularly, but I've never lived here, obviously, on a permanent basis, and now we're entering into our 8th month of living here in Australia. Yeah.
You're enjoying it?
I am, actually. I am. The winter is much kinder than New York City.
Probably the same like in California.
Yeah, we get exactly. It's very similar to the weather pattern of Los Angeles. In fact, I was talking yesterday to a great friend of mine who lives in LA, and we were talking about the similarities in the weather. And I think that's probably why there are many Australians who come over to Los Angeles to settle, to hopefully go into the movie business or production business or whatever.
Right.
And they like it because it's like home.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
How's the real estate price-wise? Is it
So
something?
the real estate price rise is about 10% down, I would say, since the beginning of the crisis. However,
And when you say beginning of the crisis, we're talking about fires first, right?
no, the fires of Australia really didn't affect actually the Sydney area that much in real estate. The fires didn't get, the closest the fires got to Sydney was about an hour and a half away from actually where the city is. So there really wasn't much chance really of during the time, because of the wonderful job that the firefighters did to encroach into the suburbs of Sydney. So in fact, prior to that, if we go back to September of last year, about from September of 18, September of September of 18 to September of 19, the market went was very depressed. It went through a very difficult period. There were many price corrections, but come into September in 2019, the market had a very big rally until basically the pandemic came in. So they had 6 months, and in some suburbs the prices were up around about 10, maybe even 12% in some areas during that trading time. Then the pandemic came in and we saw a correction go back to where we were really in September 19. And now we are starting to see an increase. Now you've got to understand that here in Australia, in Sydney, certainly, 90% of the properties that are sold through auction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's a very different
How
style of
that
selling.
work? Yeah.
So that works, and it's very good for the real estate agent. As you know, in our business, certainly in the United States, it's 100% commission business, right? We're independent contractors, and we work for ourselves, and obviously we kill what we eat, essentially, right? So here in Australia, the way they sell real estate is essentially, if they were to list the property, that the property spends 30 days on the market. It has approximately what they call here inspections, so like open houses. They have approximately maybe 6 to 8 in any given property, and they're all on designated days. So there's very few private showings. Okay, and so then what happens is that the real estate job is to understand the interest that happens, and then towards the date which has been set after the 30 days of listing, there is a set date for the auction. So the job of the real estate agent is to get the interest and to get an understanding of how many potential bidders will come. Obviously, you need 2. But what's been happening over certainly the last 2 weeks is we've started to see the clearance rate of auctions going up as much as 70%. So in the pandemic, we were seeing them around 40%, which means that only 40% of the auctions actually happened, and then 60% of them went to what they call private treaty here, which is essentially the way that we would sell, real estate in the United States, which is, you have a listed price and you have people coming in to see the property by private appointment, and then it's an organic process where a buyer will come in, and then the owner and the buyer and the seller will negotiate together in one separate party. Okay, so here in Australia, we've started to see that come back. And one of the big reasons why is because in the pandemic, obviously, you had social distancing. And we will still have that now, but you were only allowed, up until maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago, only allowed to have a certain amount of people in a household. So the auctions went online. And they started to realize that online auctions for buying your house, and most of these are primary investments. I mean, there are some which are investor properties, but many of these are people who are either trading up or trading down. It didn't work. There was very little traction. So you really need to have that live interaction with the auctioneer. And it's very interesting in our business when everyone's talking about going online and, oh, we don't need brokers, we don't need this. It's very telling to have to go through that way, through a pandemic. And it shows that.
Does it look like auctions in New York? I went to a couple of those. It's very interesting to watch how they're.
It's mainly in the house. So it's mainly in the house. So if it's a nice day, it'll be in the garden, and the auctioneer. The auctioneer and a lot of brokers are auctioneers. So actually, but like you and me going into the garden of the house and actually conducting the auction ourselves, you know, with the hammer and the bidding and all the process. So it's a very interesting tool that real estate brokers have to have here. To be able to, in order to, if they're going to work in that kind of an area. Now, most of the auction properties are between properties which are between $500,000 and I would say $3 million. Once you start to get over the $3 million mark, you start to see a lot more transactions which are happening in the normal way that we would do them. So not an auction, exactly. And especially in the market that I'm operating in, which is the high-end luxury, we see very few auctions. I mean, we might see one auction a year. But the brokers who are working in that area, they're doing auctions every single weekend. So it's a very interesting way the market happens.
It's entertaining.
Yeah. It is, and you know, and Sydney siders are very much like New Yorkers. You know, they basically the round the table conversation is real estate and schools, basically.
Okay.
And there may be one little difference here in Sydney. They talk about cars a lot. Because obviously there's, you know, the public transport is not as efficient as I should say as New York City. And in New York City, as you know, many people don't even have a car. So the conversation on cars in a New York City, down, you know, in a dinner party, it doesn't feature cars, but it features schools and real estate. So the same here.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. How is that then if it goes through auctions? How then the situation with mortgages, with financial side of purchase? Because then
so a lot of people will yeah, so a lot of people will go into a mortgage with a pre-approved. So like you would with our clients in New York, or I'm sure in Los Angeles, you know, when a buyer's going out to start looking for a property, they're going to, we always advise them to get all their finances in a good order, so that when they want to transact, they're ready with their paperwork, they're ready with their mortgage offer, and they can transact. And it's exactly the same with an auction. You have a certain amount of days, obviously, after the auction to happen to get all your paperwork, but you really need to be pre-approved. It's very important. And the mortgage business here is very active. Obviously, we have very low rates, like in the US. You know, you're getting similar kind of rates. You know, I've actually secured a mortgage for an investment property that my wife and I have in Sydney, and we've just managed to lock that down. I think it's 2.8. So you know, it's similar in the market to the US, where we have a very buoyant and active mortgage market. Yeah, but like also in New York City, there's a lot of all cash buyers here as well. So there's a mix.
Are they foreigners mostly, or?
Well, we have a lot of, you know, it's interesting. Sydney is very similar in New York in the way that there is a lot of people who have come to Sydney from other places. So we have a very strong Italian, Greek, Spanish, Lebanese, and Chinese from Hong Kong, from mainland China, Indonesia, Singaporeans who have come here maybe 2 or 3 generations ago, or maybe just, you know, a couple of years ago, or like me last year. So there's a very big melting pot of international people that are here. A lot of people will then go on to set up families here and get nationality. So there is a really good mix of buyers from lots of different places. So at the moment, obviously with the pandemic, we're only dealing with people that are onshore now. So those people who are going to buy the auction properties or buying the properties which I'm selling, you know, they've got to be here. So obviously in my market, in the luxury end, it's been slow for the last, you know, 3 to 6 months, but we're starting to see that to change now. A lot of the regulation on what's been set up for the pandemic for COVID-19 is starting to ease now, and by the middle of July here in Sydney, in New South Wales, which is the state where Sydney is located, a lot of those things are being lifted now. So the next big question is, when are people going to be able to come and fly into Australia? And the one thing that will have to change is the quarantine. It will be very, very different, difficult for international travel to recommence if you're going to quarantine people for 2 weeks in a hotel room.
Right.
That just doesn't work. So that's a decision that has to be made by the government, and hopefully they will understand that, you know, we need to get that working again soon as well. Yeah.
Is it hard to settle in Australia? Is it hard to get the passport?
I got to tell you, it is. I mean, my wife is Australian, and my children are half Australian. Okay, and I'm not. I'm an Englishman, and I'm going through an 18-month process to get a permanent residency. So it takes a long time. And believe you me, there's many questions, and there's many forms to fill in, and they want to know your the family, they want to know the friends, they want to know everything. So it's very strict, and it's an island nation. So obviously, you know, they want to protect what they have, so it's not easy. It used to be in the 1960s. They used to call them the 10-pound POMs, POM meaning an Englishman, and they used to, for 10 pounds, you could get on a boat in England and sail to Australia and start a new life. And they would let everybody, they wanted everybody in because they wanted to populate, they wanted to make, you know, they wanted to build the businesses, the industries, but no longer now. Now it's a tough place to get into.
Right. Interesting. Let's go back to real estate. The quality of properties, that's what very interested me. Like, for example, if you look at Europe, France, Paris, south of France, they're very specific. They're not like, I would say, quality, of course, there is like feel of time in the buildings. There are some particular materials that you, so it's not like if you look at Williamsburg or new constructions in New York, that all made with brand new materials, all can stand up, earthquakes, tornado, whatever, you name it. What is the quality of products there?
It's extremely good. I mean, you know, there are some houses, they call them here federation houses. So they are, I would say, the closest design I would say is maybe down from the south of the United States in Georgia, where you have those very single-story houses with the porches and the pillars, and that is a style which was started here in the sort of the early part of the 1900s. So those houses are very sought after, and they're renovated, and they're you know, there is certain areas of Sydney and outside Sydney where they have those type of houses. There is a sort of a similar design off that for the townhouses that they have in Sydney as well. So, but like every big city, there is big major construction at the moment. So there is a lot of high rises. The Sydney skyline has changed dramatically.
The high rises, are they similar? Can you compare them to one?
Very similar to New York City. Very similar to New York City. Different shapes and sizes, obviously. You know, and a lot of those buildings are multi-use. So they have offices, they have hotels, they have residential. So the new buildings coming in are very popular like that. One of the big developments by the Star Corporation and the Crown the Crown Group, they are building a very big high-rise building, which will which will have a hotel in it, a casino in it, and also at the top of the building will be, you know, $100 million apartments. So the area of what I was talking about, the CBD area, the downtown area of Sydney, historically has not been residential. It's mainly been offices and restaurants, but that's starting to change now. So rather like what happened after 9/11 in New York, you started to see downtown area getting very populated with residential buildings. It became a place where people could live and work. And the same thing is starting in Sydney now, in the CBD. So we're starting to see a shift of urban living happening again. I think there's always going to be a place for the suburban living here in Sydney because it's a lifestyle. You know, people like to be able to have a house, the water view. If you have enough income or enough funds to be able to buy yourself a $10-11 million on the waterfront, you know, that is obviously very sought after and the competition to living in a high rise in the downtown area of Sydney. So both are very popular, But the difference is that you know, when you come out of the central the CBD area of Sydney, it becomes very low rise. So most of the houses are two-story houses, and in these communities which I was mentioning, and the most affluent one is the eastern suburbs, which has the very expensive real estate.
So it doesn't sound real that Sydney has been affected the way like New York was affected with COVID, that made a lot of people migrate from New York. There's like huge wave of migration from New York right now. So
No.
you cannot say Sydney is fine.
No, we haven't seen that at all. I mean, you know, I think, you know, there has been people who, you know, have tried to get to different areas in Australia. So there have been people that were maybe working in Sydney and they wanted to get themselves up to Queensland, which is the northern state to here, where the city of Brisbane is. And so there's been a lot of trying of repatriation of people to get back to their families. But unfortunately for a lot of families who, when the pandemic started, they have not been, I mean, we know 2 or 3 American families who are very upset because they won't be able to get back to their sort of yearly pilgrimage to the US for the 4th of July, for instance. And that's just not an option this year. There's just no way of getting back there. And also it's too onerous to come back in again. So if you came back in and you have a job, you know, you're not going to be able to spend 2 weeks on your way back in a hotel room. It doesn't work. So it's just, you know, there are good and bad things about living on an island and so far away. But that's one of the difficult things that we were experiencing.
Can you say that your predictions will be that the people will be flying towards Australia more than they used to because of this kind of distance and quality of life, climate?
Yes,
from all this pandemic.
I think so, and I think that, you know, I think Australia has become a very big destination for people who have been living on mainland China over the last 10 years and maybe even as much as 15 years, where you've started to see a big migration from people coming from countries which have a different, you know, rule of law, coming to Australia, which is set up in a similar way to the UK. So the whole justice system is very similar to the UK. The whole way that the country is run in a sort of, there's parts that are like the US and there's parts that are like the UK. So it's a bit of a mix. But people, you know, feel secure here. They have good schools. They have the good, sort of good family balance, if you like. And, you know, and not an autocratic government to be dealing with. So I think Australia will always be a very popular place for people to migrate to, especially within Asia. There is still, you know, a number of people that come from the UK, come from some of the, you know, the European countries, but the main influx of people that's coming in now is coming in from Asia. And I think that we'll probably see an increase in that maybe in next year when things start to settle down and you're able to start traveling again. You know, and the real estate market will benefit from that.
Right. Yeah. What kind of prices for just 1 bedroom in the middle of nice area, like middle class? How much?
So I'll give you an example. I'm negotiating on a listing at the moment in an area called Elizabeth Bay, which is close to where the downtown area is, but it's in a high-rise block, but it's right on the water. So your view is a 180-degree view on your balcony of the water. So literally, Pierralon, it's literally right there. And you can put your boat outside. It's a 1-bedroom apartment, okay? And we're going to be listing that for approximately 2.5 million Australian dollars.
Oh, which
in the US is around about, that would be about $1.5 million US.
So you can say that prices are higher than in New York.
The prices are very, very high. And in fact, I would say they're on par with many areas of New York City. It just really depends where you are. Like in New York City, whether you're buying in Chelsea, the West Side, the East Side, up in Harlem, there's going to be many different sort of factors and different price points. It's exactly the same here in Sydney. I mean, you can buy an apartment for $300,000, a 1-bedroom apartment, but it's not going to be in the premier area. It's going to be in an area which is probably semi-industrial, maybe in a high-rise that was built in the 1960s or 1970s. You can find that. But if you're looking for, the sort of the top end, you can pay as much as, 2.5 million Australian dollars for a one-bedroom apartment. Yeah.
Very interesting. Listen, Dominic, it was very informative. Tell me last question, last answer. What
Yes,
is
of
next
course.
for you? What is next for you? Are you staying in Australia?
Yes, well, I am. As you know, I was. We were together in an office in New York City, and we're also part of the same team as well.
Yes.
So, for me, I've always wanted to keep into the New York City market, and I've managed to achieve that now with some colleagues of mine that were in the previous company where I worked, and so I'm still got my toe in there. And in Sydney, for me, this is going to be at least a 6 or 7 year stretch for me. My children are relatively young, and we want them to do high school here. I think it's important for them to be in one of the countries that they come from, so that they understand the culture and they understand, where they come from, essentially. So for the foreseeable future, I will be here. I will be. But as you know, I will be traveling. My family are still in the UK, so I will be making trips back to the UK. We're going to be getting back to New York City at the end of the year when we can fly again. I'll be traveling around, and I'm sure we'll be seeing each other.
Sure,
Maybe not this
sure.
year, but hopefully next year.
Yeah.
And I think both you and I are very similar in the way that we have transacted real estate in many different areas of the globe, and I don't want to lose that. I think that is an added benefit for our clients to have people that they want to work with who have been who understand different markets around the world, and so I may be based in Sydney, but I will be transacting all over the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, seriously international agent. If you need a broker who knows everything, here is Dominic. Please reach out. So they can always find you through me, or they can
Of course,
reach out to you directly.
absolutely.
A wonderful day. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.